Family Guy is famous for pushing buttons, but sometimes it pushes too hard and stops being funny and instead starts to feel bleak, uncomfortable, even disturbing. These are the moments that made fans pause, argue, and rethink what the show was doing. Before we begin, let's be clear about what dark means here. This isn't about being offended or clutching pearls, it's about emotional bleakness, tonal whiplash, and moments where the cruelty lands with no joke to soften it. These are episodes that tackle topics the show wasn't built to carry, where the laughs feel thinner and the discomfort sticks longer. The kind where fans skip on rewatches, argue about online, or sit through thinking, wow, this got heavy. Number 7, Brian and Stewie. Now that you know the rules, it's time to get into the video. We start at number 7, where the familiar laughs fade and the psychological tension creeps in. Brian and Stewie, usually chaos incarnate, are stripped of all distractions in this bottle episode. There are no cutaways, no music, no gags, just two characters trapped together, forced to face each other and themselves. But trapped together with nothing to distract them. How far will these two really go? Will the chaos of friendship survive, or will desperation push them to unthinkable extremes? Everything just takes a complete turn as Brian eats Stewie's diaper like a starving velociraptor. Confessions spill, with some being painfully personal, like thoughts of mortality, regrets, and even fleeting ideas of taking one's own life. Resentment simmers like a pot left on high. Somehow, the horror lingers longer than the laugh. Funny? Sure, but it's a twisted, uncomfortable kind of funny, seasoning the psychological torment rather than masking it. Number 6, Herpy, the love sore. Brian's life hits a, well, rather awkward snag. An STD diagnosis, something that should have been private, suddenly becomes the centerpiece of social scrutiny. Friends turn on him faster than a sneeze in a quiet room, treating his panic as punchlines while he fumbles to keep his dignity intact. But how does one navigate humiliation when your so-called friends gleefully judge every twitch and stumble? Will Brian survive the social carnage, or is this just another day in Quahog? Turns out, not gracefully. The jokes fly, the whispers sting, and there's zero emotional resolution. Brian gets public humiliation with a side of casual cruelty. Funny? Sure, in a darkly twisted let it burn like Usher kinda way. But the laughter masks nothing. It's socially bleak, awkwardly mean-spirited, and leaves viewers squirming more than chuckling. Family Guy proves once again that sometimes the punchline lands on the wrong person. Number 5, Meg pretends to die. In Dial, Meg for murder, Meg accidentally fakes her own death, and instead of grief, Quahog erupts into something far worse: relief. Her family is calmer, strangers are kinder, and the world feels lighter without her. Chris, in particular, thrives. With Meg gone, he suddenly becomes popular, confident, and socially accepted. When Meg realizes her absence has improved everyone's lives, she does the unthinkable, and she stays dead for their sake. And when she eventually misses her family and tries to come back, but the response isn't joy, it's panic. Chris physically ties her up and pushes her back into a truck, desperate to keep his newfound happiness intact. Family Guy has always used Meg as the punching bag, but this goes further. But what does it say when a character's death is treated as an upgrade and her return as a threat? That's where this episode turns quietly brutal. The comedy isn't exaggerated, it's disturbingly logical. Meg's value is measured entirely by how much better others feel without her. Chris's popularity is literally built on her absence, and the show portrays his betrayal not as villainy, but as self-preservation. There's no moment of guilt, no moral snapback. Meg is told, implicitly and explicitly, that love is conditional, and her presence is the problem. What makes this episode dark isn't cruelty alone. It's the acceptance. Everyone adapts instantly to a world without Meg, and no one looks back. The joke isn't that Meg is mistreated. The joke is that she always was. And if you enjoyed the video so far, make sure to subscribe to the channel as we dive into more Family Guy lore. Number 4, Invisible Noose. In this episode, Meg attends a colonial-style camp with Quagmire, his daughter, and Peter, where the episode leans into exaggerated Americana. The group participates in various camp activities, all building toward a talent show meant to be awkward, goofy, and harmless. That's where Peter, who has already been framed as out of place and performative, takes the stage. His talent turns into an invisible noose routine, miming hanging himself as a visual gag while the audience reacts with stunned confusion and scattered applause. The moment is treated as a throwaway shock joke, bundled in with slapstick and absurdity. On paper, it looks like classic Family Guy, shocking imagery, zero setup, move on fast. But this isn't a joke about Peter failing socially or being mocked by the room. So what happens when the show uses imagery tied to real trauma without irony, commentary, or consequence? That's where the discomfort settles in. The gag doesn't subvert anything, critique anything, or exaggerate for satire. It simply uses suicide imagery as visual noise. There's no framing, no reversal, no emotional buffer. The show drops the image, waits for a reaction, then walks away. For some viewers, that speed is the problem. Family Guy usually softens dark jokes with absurdity or escalation, but here, the joke lands bare. It's not shocking because it's clever. It's sad because it's careless. And that's why this moment sticks, not as bold comedy, but as an example of when the show forgot to protect the weight of what it was joking about. Number 3, Stewie gets pregnant. Family Guy has always thrived on shock, but this episode commits to a premise that refuses to blink because Stewie becomes pregnant with Brian's children. Not metaphorically, not as a quick gag, medically. The show doubles down with fertility science, ultrasound jokes, and an entire maternity photo shoot featuring Brian and Stewie posing like a glossy lifestyle couple. To make it even stranger, the episode introduces their future kids, mixed species children who look like rejected Disney experiments, but are treated as emotionally sincere outcomes of this situation. But what is the joke actually about, and why is the show treating it like a life milestone? That's where the discomfort settles in. The episode never reframes or critiques the premise, it normalizes it. The maternity shoot isn't ironic, it's earnest. The children aren't punchlines, instead they're emotional anchors. By the end, the story doesn't feel like satire at all, just prolonged commitment to a bit that loses its humor halfway through and keeps going anyway. The episode asks viewers to laugh, then care, then reflect, without ever deciding why. Instead of shock comedy, it becomes a strange exercise in sincerity, built on a joke that was never meant to survive 10 minutes, let alone an entire episode. Number 2, Meg's makeover. Before Meg's so-called makeover, Family Guy doesn't just call her ugly, it ritualistically reacts to her presence like she's a biohazard. Characters gag on sight. Strangers vomit mid-sentence. One man literally sets himself on fire rather than acknowledge she exists in the same visual plane. This isn't an exaggeration. It is the joke. Meg isn't unattractive, but she's treated like a walking crime against nature. And the show wants us to laugh at how violently the world rejects her. So when Meg suddenly becomes conventionally attractive with confidence, styling, and attention, it felt like a reset button. People listen, doors open, and respect appears out of nowhere. But if basic human decency only arrives after a makeover, what exactly was the joke before? That's where the episode turns dark. The makeover doesn't expose Meg's growth, it exposes everyone else. The vomit gags, the fire gag, the exaggerated disgust weren't absurdist fluff. They were conditioning. The show trained the audience to see Meg as unworthy of empathy unless she's fixed. And when the episode inevitably snaps back to status quo, it confirms that Meg's suffering was never the problem. It was the punchline. The darkest part isn't that people hated her. It's that the show treated that hatred as normal, even necessary. Number 1, Seahorse Seashell Party. Seahorse Seashell Party traps the Griffin family inside their house during a hurricane. A classic sitcom setup meant for chaos and laughs. But instead of escalating into absurd comedy, the episode slows down. The storm outside becomes background noise, and the real damage happens inside the living room. This is one of the rare moments where Family Guy pauses its cutaways and lets silence do the work. And that's when the episode asks something unsettling. What happens when the family punching bag finally stops playing along? Meg's monologue is the emotional core. And it hits harder because it isn't exaggerated. She doesn't scream for laughs. She calmly dissects her family, how they belittle her, depend on her, and need her misery to function. For a brief moment, the show feels honest, raw, and almost uncomfortable to watch. And then it just resets. Meg apologizes. The family absorbs nothing. The abuse continues. That's what makes this episode hurt. Not the cruelty, but the awareness of it. Family Guy doesn't undo the damage because the point is that nothing ever changes. The show acknowledges Meg's suffering, then deliberately locks it back into place. There's no growth arc, no lesson learned, no emotional payoff. Just a quiet confirmation that this is the role she's been assigned, and the family needs it that way. The darkness here isn't shock humor or bad timing. It's existential. Meg sees the truth and chooses silence so the system can survive. Family Guy has always thrived on excess. It pokes, prods, offends, and dares the audience to laugh anyway. Most of the time, that recklessness is exactly what makes it work. But every now and then, the balance slips. The joke lingers too long. The punchline never comes. And what's left isn't satire, it's discomfort. These episodes stay with fans not because they're shocking, but because they feel wrong in a way the show never quite resolves. They're reminders that comedy needs a release valve. Because Family Guy works best when it dances on the edge, but every once in a while, it steps right over it. But what do you think? Which Family Guy episode made you feel uncomfortable, not offended, just uneasy? Let us know your thoughts. And if you like this, make sure to check out our video on the strongest versus weakest characters in Family Guy.